In the summer of 2011, a 29-year-old software engineer named Michael Larson sat in his cramped studio apartment in Brooklyn at 2:47 in the morning, the blue glow of his dual monitors casting shadows across his unshaven face. He hadn't slept in 38 hours. His hands trembled, not from exhaustion but from the realization that was currently unfolding across his screen in neat rows of green text. Michael had just discovered something that shouldn't exist, something that violated every principle of modern banking, something that made his stomach drop and his heart race like he'd just stepped off a cliff. He was staring at a glitch in reality itself, and it was worth more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. Michael had always been the kid who saw patterns where others saw noise. At 7, he memorized his father's credit card numbers by watching the way his fingers moved across the keypad. At 12, he built his first encryption algorithm using nothing but a TI-83 calculator and pure obsession. By 16, he'd been quietly hired by his high school to fix a security flaw in their grading system, a flaw he'd discovered and reported, not exploited, though the temptation had been electric. Now, with an MIT degree and 3 years of grinding code at a fintech startup that paid him barely enough to cover rent, that same electric temptation was coursing through his veins like voltage. The difference was, this time, there was no one to report it to, because what he'd found wasn't a bug. It was a feature of the universe that no one was supposed to see. It started 3 weeks earlier when Michael was debugging a payment processing system for his company. He noticed something bizarre in the transaction logs, a peculiar delay, a ghost of a moment where money seemed to flicker between existence and non-existence. Most engineers would have dismissed it as latency, as normal network lag between banks communicating across outdated infrastructure. But Michael didn't dismiss anything. He pulled the thread. He spent every night for 21 consecutive days mapping the architecture of the global banking system like a cartographer charting an undiscovered continent. What he found made his hands shake so violently he had to step away from his keyboard. Due to the way banks communicated through intermediary clearinghouses, due to legacy systems built in the 1970s that no one had properly updated, due to the fundamental speed limitations of data traveling across continents, there existed a window, sometimes 200 milliseconds, sometimes as long as 3 full seconds, where money existed in 2 places simultaneously. The technical term was temporal arbitrage, but Michael called it something more honest: the seam. It was the place where reality's code had a vulnerability, where the illusion of instantaneous transactions revealed itself to be exactly that, an illusion. And if you were fast enough, precise enough, ruthless enough, you could reach into that seam and pull out whatever you wanted. Michael's first thought wasn't, should I do this? His first thought was, how many people have already discovered this and kept quiet? The question haunted him. It justified him. It gave him permission. On September 14, 2011, at 3:47 in the morning, Michael initiated his first test. His studio apartment was silent, except for the hum of his computer fans and the sound of his own breathing, which had become shallow and rapid. He'd created 2 accounts at different banks under shell company names he'd registered through a Panamanian law firm that asked no questions. The test amount was $50. $50 that would be simultaneously transferred between accounts, leveraging the temporal gap to duplicate the transaction before the system could reconcile. Michael's finger hovered over the enter key for a full 30 seconds. He could hear his pulse in his ears. He pressed it. For 2.3 seconds, nothing happened. Then his screen erupted with confirmation messages. The transfer had worked. But more than that, the duplication had worked. In the space where reality blinked, Michael had stolen a moment, and in that moment, he'd created money from nothing. Within 48 hours, through a cascading series of automated transactions his program executed while he stared at his screen unable to look away, that $50 had become $2,400. Michael sat motionless in his desk chair as morning light began filtering through his blinds. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't moved. He'd just watched numbers multiply like living things. Then he did something he'd remember for the rest of his life. He laughed. It was a strange, broken sound, something between exhilaration and terror. Because he understood now, with absolute clarity, that he'd just crossed a line that had no return path. By the end of week 1, Michael had generated $127,000. He withdrew it in careful increments, converting it through cryptocurrency exchanges and offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, layering the transactions through so many jurisdictions that tracing the original source would require an archaeological expedition through digital time. The money felt unreal in his hands, like he'd reached into a video game and pulled out physical currency. He upgraded to a 2-bedroom apartment in Manhattan with floor-to-ceiling windows. He bought his mother a house in Connecticut, told her he'd made investments, which was technically true, just not in the way she imagined. She cried with joy on the phone, told him his father would have been proud, and Michael felt something twist in his chest that might have been guilt, but felt more like vertigo. The program he'd built, he called it Kronos after the Greek god who devoured his own children, was a masterpiece of precision. It operated across 23 banks initially, creating thousands of micro-accounts that existed only in the margins of bureaucracy, executing simultaneous transactions that exploited the seam with surgical accuracy. Every night, Michael would return to his apartment, pour himself expensive whiskey he'd never developed a taste for, and watch the numbers climb. $300,000, $850,000, $2.1 million. The money accumulated with the inevitability of compound interest, except the interest rate was infinity. He started having dreams where he was falling through spreadsheets, where numbers had teeth, where bank vaults opened into empty space and he just kept falling. By March 2012, Kronos had generated $14.7 million, and Michael had stopped feeling human. He'd look at his reflection in the bathroom mirror of his luxury apartment and see a stranger wearing his face. He dated women who were attracted to wealth without questioning its source. Models, actresses, professional beauty, and human form, and felt nothing except the distant observation that this was what winning was supposed to feel like. He traveled to Monaco, sat at poker tables in Monte Carlo where single hands were worth more than his father had earned in a year, and played with a recklessness that came from understanding that money, at a certain scale, becomes as abstract as the code that generated it. The other players thought he was brave. He was actually just numb, but something was changing in the machine. Michael started noticing irregularities in March. Small anomalies where Kronos would trigger micro-alerts in banking systems, digital footprints that were being flagged as processing errors, but appeared with suspicious frequency. A rational person would have stopped. A person who valued freedom over wealth would have deleted everything, taken what they had, and disappeared into a quiet life somewhere warm and anonymous. Michael did the opposite, because by now it wasn't about the money. It had never really been about the money. It was about touching something transcendent, about proving that reality's rules were negotiable if you were smart enough. He upgraded Kronos, made it faster, more aggressive, more elegant. The program now operated across 47 financial institutions simultaneously, executing thousands of transactions per second, moving through the banking system like a ghost train that couldn't be derailed because it existed in the spaces between moments. The money became obscene. $30 million, $50 million, $89 million. Michael stopped checking the balances after a while. Numbers that large lost meaning. He'd lie awake at 4 a.m. in sheets that cost more than cars, staring at the ceiling, feeling his heartbeat in an arrhythmic pattern that his doctor said was anxiety, but felt more like his body rebelling against what his mind had become. He started seeing patterns everywhere, in traffic lights, in the way people walked, in the flicker of fluorescent lights. His brain, trained to find exploits, couldn't stop exploiting. Every system was vulnerable. Every structure had a seam. He was becoming the thing he'd created, a program that couldn't stop running even when running meant self-destruction. What Michael didn't know, what he couldn't have known because he was too deep inside his own brilliance to see the larger pattern, was that on April 3, 2012, a forensic analyst named Rebecca Chen was having her own moment of terrible clarity. Rebecca worked in the fraud detection unit at J.P. Morgan Chase, and she'd been reviewing overnight transaction logs at 11:30 p.m. when she noticed something that made her stop mid-sip of her fifth coffee. There were patterns in the noise. Repetitive anomalies that appeared across multiple accounts, in multiple states, at times that correlated with precision that couldn't be random. She'd spent 15 years hunting financial criminals, the amateurs who left obvious trails, the professionals who were careful but predictable, the syndicates that were sophisticated but ultimately human in their patterns. This was different. This was algorithmic. This was someone who'd found a way to make the system bleed without leaving fingerprints. Rebecca became obsessed. She started working 16-hour days, mapping the irregularities across a timeline, building network diagrams that looked like spider webs. Her supervisor told her she was chasing ghosts. Her husband told her she was working too much. But Rebecca had a sense, the kind that comes from years of pattern recognition, that she was hunting something unprecedented. She reached out to colleagues at other banks, carefully, professionally, asking if they'd seen similar anomalies. The responses came back slowly, reluctantly. Yes, they'd seen things, unexplained things, but nothing they could quantify. By mid-April, Rebecca had assembled an informal task force, 6 analysts from major banks, all of them driven by the same unsettling realization that someone had hacked something fundamental. They brought in the FBI on April 18th. Special Agent Marcus Webb listened to Rebecca's presentation with the expression of someone being told the laws of physics were optional. He asked her to repeat certain parts 3 times. When she finished, there was a long silence in the conference room. Then Webb said something that would later appear in the case file. If what you're saying is true, we're not investigating fraud. We're investigating someone who figured out how to break time. They called it Operation Kronos, a name chosen randomly from Greek mythology by an agent who had no idea that was exactly what Michael had named his own creation. The coincidence would later seem like evidence that the universe has a sense of irony. The investigation moved with the speed of bureaucracy, which is to say, agonizingly. Michael had been brilliant in his obfuscation, routing transactions through 34 different countries using encryption that would take quantum computers to crack, building layer upon layer of corporate entities that existed only on paper. But brilliance has a weakness. It gets comfortable. On April 29th, Michael made a mistake so simple, so human, that when the FBI reconstructed the timeline later, they almost couldn't believe it. He wire transferred $240,000 from one of his offshore accounts directly to a real estate company in Miami to purchase a penthouse apartment. It was a clean transaction, straightforward, the kind of thing people do every day. It was also a direct line connecting Michael Larson, 29-year-old software engineer from Brooklyn, to an empire of shadow money that shouldn't exist. Rebecca found the connection on May 4th at 2:17 in the morning. She'd been awake for 31 hours, surviving on coffee and the manic energy that comes from being close to something enormous. When the link appeared on her screen, a single transaction that connected to a person with a real name, a real address, a real life, she actually gasped. Then she called Webb. Within 72 hours, the FBI had everything: Michael's location, his background, his patterns, his vulnerabilities. They assembled a tactical team. They got their warrants. They planned the arrest for dawn because people are most vulnerable in those early morning hours, still caught between sleep and waking, not yet armored for the day. May 7th, 2012, 6:23 in the morning. Michael was eating breakfast in his Manhattan apartment, reading an article on his iPad about banking security. The irony wouldn't occur to him until later, when 12 federal agents burst through his door with weapons drawn and voices shouting. Michael's first thought was remarkably calm. Finally. His second thought was noticing that he'd dropped his coffee, and the stain spreading across his expensive rug looked like a Rorschach test. He didn't resist, didn't run, didn't even seem surprised. He asked for his lawyer, was read his rights, and stayed silent while they photographed him, fingerprinted him, processed him through the machinery of justice like a transaction being cleared. They seized 7 computers, 18 hard drives, and documentation for 127 separate bank accounts. In the interrogation room, when they showed him the evidence, Rebecca's maps, the timeline, the connections they'd drawn, Michael did something unexpected. He smiled. Not with happiness, but with something closer to relief. The game was over, and game's ending meant he could finally stop playing. The final tally stunned everyone. In just 8 months, Michael Larson had extracted $143.7 million from the global banking system. He'd done it using nothing but code, mathematics, and the fundamental gap between what we believe reality is and what reality actually is when you look close enough. The number was so large that the FBI had to verify it 3 separate times. Banks had to explain to their boards how someone had stolen this much money without anyone noticing. Regulators had to explain how the system they oversaw could have such a fundamental vulnerability. No one had good answers, because Michael hadn't broken the rules. He'd found the place where the rules didn't exist yet. The trial was a spectacle. It lasted 7 weeks and was covered by every major news outlet. Prosecutors painted Michael as a criminal mastermind who'd threatened the structural integrity of the entire financial system, a digital terrorist who'd planted bombs in the foundation of civilization. They brought in expert witnesses who testified that if Michael's methods became public knowledge, it could trigger a collapse of confidence in banking that would make 2008 look like a minor correction. The defense argued something more interesting, that Michael had exposed catastrophic security flaws that banks had been too negligent or incompetent to fix, that he was a whistleblower who'd used unconventional methods, that the real crime was the system itself. The jury heard testimony from 47 witnesses. They saw diagrams of Michael's operation that looked like abstract art. They were shown the houses he'd bought, the cars, the lifestyle, evidence of guilt through luxury. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the forewoman's hand shook as she read the verdict. Guilty on 47 counts: wire fraud, computer fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. Michael stood motionless as each count was read, his face completely neutral, as if he was listening to someone read stock prices. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. During those 2 weeks, Michael gave a single interview to a journalist from Wired magazine. He said something that became infamous. "I didn't steal from people. I stole from the idea that money is real. And it turns out money isn't real. It's just collective belief with really bad error correction." Sentencing day arrived on a Thursday in October. The courtroom was packed. Victims, banks, mostly, gave impact statements about the resources spent fixing vulnerabilities, the damage to public trust, the precedent of allowing someone to literally hack reality and walk away. Michael's mother testified, crying, saying her son had always been good, had always been curious, had never meant to hurt anyone. The judge, a woman named Sandra Ito, who'd been on the bench for 27 years, listened to everything with an expression that revealed nothing. When it was Michael's turn to speak, he stood slowly. He'd lost weight during the trial. His expensive suit hung on him like a costume. Michael spoke for 4 minutes. He didn't apologize. He didn't beg for mercy. Instead, he said this: "Everyone in this courtroom believes money is real. We believe it so completely that we've built entire civilizations around that belief. But money is just information. It's ones and zeros in databases, it's promises made by institutions, it's collective faith that these pieces of paper or digital numbers have value. I found a place where that faith had a gap, where the information got confused about what was real and what wasn't. I exploited that gap, but I didn't create it. The system created it. The system that everyone here defends is built on architecture from the 1970s, held together with duct tape and prayer, and my only crime was noticing. If one person with a laptop can extract $143 million in 8 months, maybe the crime isn't what I did. Maybe the crime is that everyone knew it was possible and did nothing until someone actually did it." Judge Ito sentenced him to 22 years in federal prison. As the bailiff led Michael away, he turned back once and looked at the courtroom. His mother was crying. The prosecutors were already packing their briefcases. Rebecca Chen, sitting in the back, met his eyes for a brief second. Michael nodded at her. She nodded back. It was the acknowledgement of two people who'd been playing the same game from opposite sides, both understanding that the game itself was the point. Today, Michael Larson is inmate 847-21054 at FCI Schuylkill in Pennsylvania. He's 42 now, with gray appearing at his temples, and he teaches coding classes to other inmates who listen with the attention of disciples. He's written 2 books about cybersecurity that are required reading at MIT and Stanford. He receives letters from people around the world, some calling him a criminal, some calling him a hero, some asking for technical advice that he never answers. The banking industry spent an estimated $8.4 billion closing the vulnerability he exploited. Every major financial institution upgraded their systems, built new protocols, created safeguards against temporal arbitrage. They built walls around the seam Michael had found. But here's what keeps people awake at night. Only $31 million of Michael's money was ever recovered. The rest, $112.7 million, remains hidden somewhere in the labyrinth of offshore accounts, cryptocurrency wallets, and shell corporations that even the FBI's best forensic accountants couldn't fully trace. There are theories. Some believe Michael created a digital dead man switch, that the money will be automatically distributed if he dies. Others think he built an AI that continues to move the money, making it impossible to track. The most disturbing theory, whispered among cybersecurity experts, is that Michael left behind breadcrumbs, a map that could lead someone to his fortune, but only if they're as smart as he was. Michael himself refuses to discuss it. In his last interview before prison, a journalist asked him directly where the money was. Michael smiled, that same strange, broken smile from the night he first ran Kronos, and said, "Money isn't a place, it's a state of mind." When pressed, he added, "But hypothetically, if someone were to look very carefully at certain cryptocurrency transactions on the Ethereum blockchain between October 2011 and April 2012, They might find patterns that look like noise, but aren't, hypothetically. Late at night, when the prison is dark and quiet except for the sounds of men dreaming behind steel doors, Michael lies awake thinking about the seam. He thinks about those 200 milliseconds where reality blinked and he reached through. He thinks about the fact that in the years since his arrest, global banking has processed trillions of transactions, each one a potential vulnerability, each one a moment where reality might flicker. He thinks about the fact that somewhere out there, someone else is staring at code at 3 in the morning, seeing patterns, pulling threads, discovering that the universe has gaps if you know where to look. And maybe that person will be smarter than Michael. Maybe they'll be more careful. Maybe they'll find an even deeper seam, a larger vulnerability, a way to reach further into the places where reality's code shows its errors. The terrifying truth is that Michael didn't discover something unique. He discovered something reproducible. And in a world where millions of brilliant, desperate, curious people have access to computers and endless nights to explore, the only question isn't if someone will find the next seam. The question is how many people have already found it and just haven't been caught yet. How many Michael Larsons are operating right now, in this moment, reaching into the gaps that separate what we believe from what actually is? How much money exists that shouldn't exist? How much of our reality is already compromised by people who discovered the code? Rebecca Chen thinks about this too. She's been promoted twice since Operation Kronos, now heads the entire fraud detection division at JP Morgan. She still works late nights, still sees patterns in the noise, still hunts for the ghosts in the machine. But sometimes, when she's reviewing transaction logs at 2 a.m., she sees anomalies she can't quite explain. Small things. Probably nothing. Probably just glitches. She flags them anyway. Because she knows what Michael proved, that reality has seams, that money is just collective belief, and that somewhere in the mathematical foundations of civilization, there are vulnerabilities waiting to be found by someone curious enough, brilliant enough, reckless enough to look. The code to infinite money wasn't really about money at all. It was about understanding that everything we trust, banks, systems, the very concept of value, is built on infrastructure that was designed by humans, which means it has human flaws. And human flaws can be exploited. Michael found one exploit. The question that keeps people awake, the question that banking executives pay consultants millions to answer, the question that has no comfortable answer, is this: how many more exploits are out there? How many seams exist in reality that we just haven't noticed yet? And when the next Michael Larson appears, because there will be a next one, there always is, will we catch them in 8 months, or will they be smart enough to stay invisible forever? If this story left you staring at your screen wondering what else might be possible, you're not alone. Hit that subscribe button because the rabbit holes we're about to explore go so much deeper than you think.